Kia ora koutou katoa, ko John Reid, take whenua. Welcome to this edition of Water New Zealand's podcast series, Tawara o Te Wai. I'm John Reid from Water New Zealand. Today, we're going to talk about indigenous knowledge and how it might be incorporated as part of water industry projects in Aotearoa. This follows on from a presentation that our guest today, Charlie Ropitini, gave at the Water New Zealand conference in October. Charlie is the Principal Advisor Relationships, Responsiveness and Culture at Hastings District Council and works across water, parks and other areas of council. He describes himself as a cultural engineer or third space practitioner, bridging the gap between engineering and Maori knowledge and experience. We're very pleased to have Charlie with us on the podcast today. Kia ora, Charlie and Hannah.
Kia ora, John. Thank you for that welcome. It's lovely to be with you today. Tēnā koutou.
Thanks for joining us today. So, Hannah, over to you.
Thanks, John, and kia ora, Charlie. It's fantastic to have you on here and to be able to share with everybody else the excitement that John and I had from your presentation at Water New Zealand this year. So, John's given your title, and I guess that covers quite a lot, but in your work at Hastings District Council, how do you try and apply the lens of Mātauranga Māori to the water projects?
We do that very carefully, actually. Kia ora, Hannah. It's at Heretaunga Hastings District Council, we're actually guided in most of our cultural approaches, unusually by a Te Reo Māori policy. And the Te Reo Māori policy is named Heretaunga Araro, from a proverb of this area. And within that policy, there's an action plan stepped out. And one of those actions was to adopt a design philosophy and co-design approach for mana whenua to work with council in significant projects. And so our council adopted the National Cultural Landscape Strategy, Te Aronga, known as Te Aronga Design Principles, that were actually adopted here at Te Aronga Marae and Flaxmere, Pāharakeke, just outside of Hastings, by a group of architects. So our council, with those principles through Te Reo Māori, which is an important component of design, have been working in a co-design space for a long time, and with water, that's where you really apply Mātauranga Māori quite broadly because of what water stands for. So, yeah, unusually through Te Reo Māori.
Which is quite amazing, isn't it? Because it's not actually necessarily about the technical detail, it's about the lens that you're looking through and kind of taking that more holistic picture, looking at the te reo, the language that you're using around it. Could you maybe give us some examples of some of the projects where that's been applied?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking at a particular project at the moment, and the Māori name for the area is Ruakokopōtuna. And Ruakokopōtuna was an area along the Ngaruroro River, the old Ngaruroro River, now known as the Karamu Stream, where Havelock North is now, and two streams flowing down from the Tamata Hills, joining with the Ngaruroro River. So Ruakoko, Rua, two, tahi, Rua, toruwha. So Rua, two, Koko, bays, Pōtuna, sleeping tunas, or many tunas, so many tuna that the water turns black. So a nice resting place for eels coming out of the streams from the Tamata Hills, around two bays along the stretch of the Ngaruroro River. So these traditional names unpack cultural information, they unpack environmental information, and in some cases they can actually unpack engineering information as well. So it's a blend of cultural landscape mapping, a blend of cultural engagement through traditionally what we'd call cultural impact assessments, or cultural values assessments, and applying the outcomes of those assessments through good co-design practice by unlocking and decoding te reo Māori.
And I think for me, that's the bit that I find really fascinating, is that it's a step back from, I guess, the Western view of the black and white, but actually getting to those metaphors and understanding those stories can totally be understood in a slightly more scientific way. It's about how we really get into the detail of it.
That's right. So metaphor, you mentioned metaphor, that's really important. And that's where the marriage of Mātauranga Māori and Western engineering science can really be fused together quite effectively. So our council have recently built a new water treatment plant in the middle of town with a carved meeting house that's both traditional and contemporary in its design to teach the story of water. And applying metaphor, the facility is named Waiaroha, and the actual treatment plant is Te Puku o Te Taniwha, which is the guts of the eel. And by saying this is the guts of the eel, and with the engineering being totally open for public viewing, it actually looks intestinal with all of these pipes and whatnot on display doing what they do. So taking that traditional story of our people keeping an eel in the well, and the eel in the well would keep the water filtrated, the eel would eat all of the bugs, and they would replace the eel regularly so it didn't get too big. So there is a traditional association with the eel and its role in water filtration. And how that's now applied to it, not to co-design an engineered response to water treatment, but to explain the engineering. And, you know, when I've got 30 kids with me at Waiaroha and I tell them this is a water treatment plant, it goes straight over their head. As soon as we start saying this is the guts of an eel, Te Puku o Te Taniwha, and what's actually happening with the water in the guts of the eel, it's a much more engaging experience, and it also gives some pride to the engineers to be able to talk about what they do, because it's quite hard, right? It's quite hard to explain what you're doing because it takes an engineering mind to get to grips with it. So the marriage of metaphor with engineering and Mātauranga Māori is a wonderful marriage.
Yeah, I love some of those metaphors and how we can try and use those to better explain what we're doing more generally. How does that then move into some of the more practical things, Charlie? So, you know, if you were asked about a certain project, how does sort of bringing that knowledge to translate to maybe changing or working with the engineers to better develop designs?
Well, largely what I'm driven by is what the response of our mana whenua whānau is to the project. And sometimes that can be a precarious position, and roles like mine have to walk delicately in the middle between your planning team and the mana whenua, who in most cases are your whānau. So a lot of it is how effective council engages with mana whenua in a very transparent way to create opportunities for good co-design to take place. So a lot of the outputs are driven by mana whenua, and that can be exciting in itself, but it requires some flexibility of the team to be able to apply the co-design principles.
Which actually is part of the challenge. And I guess also in that space with mana whenua, they also tend to think on a slightly different scale. It's a longer term, it's a bigger picture than sometimes we do in the engineering world. And so that's also a slightly different lens and a shift, and you're doing that in a few different directions, aren't you?
Well, I'd say that's a perception, Hannah.
Cool.
Why I say it's a perception is because actually our stormwater managers are long-term planners. And it surprises me how surprising this is to my colleagues. and to the sector as a whole, that actually once our engineers and our mana whenua whānau start coming together and actually talking, I've seen some wonderful light bulb moments on both sides when they start talking in 100-year blocks. When they start talking longer term, and actually the realization that our water engineers do this on a regular basis, and so it's that realization actually of where the commonalities are, and that's a good step towards co-design as well, as knowing what the commonalities are. So there is this perception that the thinking's quite different. But it's actually, once we're in the same room and we're talking, those long-term views, they're held by both sides. So once you agree on that, and you have both sides agreeing, okay, yeah, this is a 100-year plan. Now, what's the partnership through that? What are the 10-year blocks? What can we achieve right now? What do we need to put in place to steer a really good project and its cultural outcomes together?
Fantastic. And it's good to hear that from you, because I think also sometimes we sit in our bubble and we look at, I guess, again, we're going back to that thing of people are looking at things from a different perspective and they're coming at it from a different angle, but it's incredible to find out how many overlaps we have. We just are approaching it from a slightly different way, aren't we?
That's right. And that's really where the magic happens, and that's the beauty of working with third space practitioners. And as a third space practitioner, it's really important for me to insert myself into the water sector with my colleagues, so that I can provide them really tangible and practical advice on how to implement the cultural aspirations that are procured through cultural reports. And that's really what a lot of our colleagues need, is the translation of what can be quite verbose reports with screeds of cultural values that actually we don't know what to do with. So it's the role of the third space practitioner to really find those commonalities, to point out the points of importance to mana whenua, and how really to build a bridge together that people understand what each other are saying. And that leads to some really simple co-design solutions, or they could be great big plans of millions of dollars that require big cultural teams. So it really can be scaled up, scaled down with cultural engagement, but that person in the middle is critical.
And it sounds like you're quite specialist in that area, being a third space practitioner, coming across people like yourself, and you've probably not got a huge amount of others around in that space.
I know within the water sector, the cultural competency and the cultural requirements are huge, but the willingness to achieve those is there. And I think when you have that willingness, there is a willingness on the other side to want to be a part of these solutions for infrastructure, and particularly moving us into the future. So that's fundamentally why third space practitioners as a sector is flourishing. And that's because of the need to have these people in the middle that are cross-disciplinary, that can cross-pollinate ideas. So how we do that at Heretaunga Hastings District Council is we tend to form bespoke teams for projects that include Māori designers, artists and architects from a collective of artists and designers called Iwi Toi Kahungunu. They're a very diverse collective of all of our tribal artists and designers. And our Māori artists and designers around here, they don't have high business acumen. They're not good administrators. They're good at what they're good at, which is being designers and artists and architects. So we tend to match them with other organisations, landscape architects, water engineers, that they can work alongside to bring ideas to life, and then start those connections. So a project team might have a kaumātua advisor from mana whenua, might have 2 or 3 mana whenua artists and designers, a water engineer, parks and reserves manager, and a couple of others that are working to an agreed set of principles for a unique outcome. And we see that through our wastewater treatment plant, Te Whare o Whiro. We see that through the outcome of Waiaroha, our water treatment plant, and most recently in our waste minimisation space with Te Whare Mukupara at the Omarunui landfill. So what started off as principles related to water and water engineering, born out of a te reo Māori policy, has now morphed into highly effective environmental principles that are applied across all council projects with strong partnership with mana whenua. So it's quite a unique situation we've found ourselves in.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Charlie. And sort of what have you seen outside of Aotearoa? There's obviously so many different indigenous groups around the world, and many have the similar connections with water. I don't know if you've been sort of involved or connected with other groups, and what have you seen?
Yeah, there's a lot going on within indigenous communities around the world in relation to water rights and infrastructure. So I have the luxury, well, I don't think it's a luxury, actually, it's a real privilege and honour of working as a council officer, but also being a mana whenua person myself here in my own mana whenua rohe. So most of the people I deal with are my own family relations. So on the mana whenua side, we have our own networks as well through Ngāti Kahungunu and the view into what other indigenous people are doing around the world. And sometimes we have to look off this island to what others are doing. One, to solidify our own Mātauranga Māori and engineering thinking, but two, to look at where we can take from the experiences and lessons learnt from others. And so we have people that look to Alaska, to Canada, and some of those people in Canada, some of the Aboriginal people in Australia, and more recently to the sponge cities concept coming out of China. And that's really in recognition that the vast part of the Heretaunga Plains are floodplains. It's a natural floodplain fed by rivers from mountain to sea. So why it's important to our mana whenua whānau is to return and make way for water to recharge our aquifer, to moisturise our Mother Earth papatuanuku. And we have manipulated the landscape here and removed 98% of our surface aquifer that we call our wetlands and rivers of Heretaunga Hopunui. So if we consider our Earth Mother papatuanuku, we've removed 98% of her moisturisation. So at Waiaroha, when I'm teaching large groups of maybe say it's a girls' school, well, you shouldn't discriminate these days, eh? So the example of moisturising our skin. So keeping our skin moisturised, and let's just say you can only use 2% of your normal moisturiser a day and see how far that gets you. So just experiment and use 2% of what you ordinarily would. So through the Māori lens, that's how we view our mothers, that we've taken her oil of Olay away, which is what my mum used to use, right? So that's a large part of the thinking around, well, here's a model in sponge cities that's making way for water, that's allowing that moisturisation, that's mitigating flood risk in it to a large part. How can we do that here? Now, Hastings used to have streams running through it that were anabranch rivers connecting the Ngaruroro River. as a part of its braids across the plain. So there were rivers, they were manipulated, taken away, and even piped. They're still there underground. You can access the Mākirikiri River under the stage of the Opera House and the orchestra pit. There's a drum there, and you can view the river with its white sands underneath the orchestra pit of the Opera House. So the rivers have been manipulated. Now, we can't quite return those rivers very easily. But by looking at what indigenous people are doing around the world, this one comes from Mexico, where you can create roads that the water drains through. So that's a large aspiration, is to consider how are we building our roads in the CBD. Could we do it better? Could we allow some filtration back to moisturise our Mother Earth Papatūānuku? So the indigenous view around the world is critical to viewing ourselves and how we can work with others to implement some of what are called quite crazy solutions, actually, by some of the sector.
So we all got to step out of our comfort bubble and start looking at what examples and what we can learn from each other, whether that's within Aotearoa or overseas. I think that's a fantastic message to be passing through.
Thanks, Charlie. I've really enjoyed the metaphors and the way you've been explained things, and I love your work really there in thinking in the long term between engineers and mana whenua groups. So kia ora, well done. Keep it up. Thanks very much for sharing all your knowledge and experience with us today.
Kia ora, John. Thank you for hosting me, and thank you for your questions, Hannah, and I hope that that's helpful to all of our colleagues. Tēnā koutou katoa.
So if you're interested in finding out more about how cultural knowledge can be included in projects, Water New Zealand is running its very popular cultural significance module. That's with actually one of my colleagues, Troy Brockbank, and that's starting on the 13th of February. So check that out on the Water New Zealand website if you're interested. Thank you again, Charlie, for joining Hannah and myself today. It was great to talk to you about your work in bringing Indigenous knowledge to the water industry. And thanks to everyone for listening to this latest episode. We'll be back next month with our next podcast.